May 27, 1942, 8 o'clock in the morning. In a basement beneath Pearl Harbor, a young lieutenant commander named Edwin Layton holds a single sheet of paper in his trembling hands. On this paper is something no military officer in history had ever possessed. The enemy's complete battle plan. Not a guess, not an estimate. The exact location, the exact time, the exact force. In 15 minutes, he will walk into Admiral Chester Nimitz's office and deliver a forecast so precise, so impossible, that it will be remembered as the greatest intelligence prediction in the history of warfare. This is the story of how America broke Japan's unbreakable code and turned the tide of World War II. December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. But what the American public didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that this catastrophe was more than a military failure. It was an intelligence catastrophe. Within 6 months, the Empire of Japan had conquered an area larger than Western Europe. Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines, Singapore, Hong Kong, the Dutch East Indies. The Imperial Japanese Navy ruled the Pacific undefeated, seemingly unstoppable. In late December 1941, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz assumed command of what remained of the Pacific Fleet. He inherited a graveyard. 8 battleships destroyed or damaged. 3 carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were all that stood between Japan and the complete conquest of the Pacific. But Nimitz had something the Japanese didn't expect. Something they believed was impossible. Deep in a basement at Pearl Harbor, in a room so hot and cramped that men called it the dungeon, a team of cryptanalysts had been doing the impossible. They were breaking Japan's primary naval code, JN-25, and they were led by a chain-smoking genius in a purple smoking jacket named Joseph Rochefort. Commander Joseph Rochefort was not what you'd expect of a naval officer. He worked in a velvet smoking jacket and slippers. He rarely slept. He chain-smoked, and he was arguably the most brilliant cryptanalyst in the United States Navy. In 1929, a young ensign named Edwin Layton met Rochefort on a ship bound for Tokyo. Both had been selected for an elite program, 3 years immersed in Japanese language and culture. They became friends. They studied together. They learned to think like the enemy. By May 1942, that friendship had become America's secret weapon. Rochefort commanded Station Hypo, the combat intelligence unit hidden beneath the 14th Naval District building. Layton was Admiral Nimitz's fleet intelligence officer. Every morning at 8 a.m., Layton briefed Nimitz. Every night, he descended into the dungeon to work with Rochefort. The Japanese code JN-25 consisted of 45,000 5-digit number groups. Each group represented a word or phrase. The code changed constantly. Breaking it required mathematical genius, linguistic intuition, and relentless determination. By April 1942, Station Hypo could read perhaps 15% of intercepted Japanese messages. But 15% was enough. Because in those fragments, they saw something coming, something big. In late April and early May, Station Hypo intercepted dozens of Japanese messages referencing a massive operation, an invasion force. 4 aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, troop transports, all converging on a target designated by 2 letters, AF. But where was AF? Rochefort believed it was Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of sand and coral 300 miles northwest of Hawaii, the last American outpost before the Hawaiian Islands themselves. Washington disagreed. The Navy brass in OP-20G, the code-breaking headquarters in Washington, insisted AF was somewhere else. Perhaps Port Moresby, perhaps the Aleutians, perhaps even a feint with the real target being Pearl Harbor or the West Coast. Nimitz was in an impossible position. He had exactly 3 aircraft carriers to defend half the Pacific Ocean. If he guessed wrong about AF, he could lose not just the battle, but the entire war. Japan would control Hawaii. They could threaten California. America might be forced to sue for peace. Rochefort and Layton knew they were right, but knowing wasn't enough. They needed proof. And so they devised one of the most brilliant deceptions in intelligence history. Pearl Harbor and Midway were connected by an underwater cable, invulnerable to Japanese interception. Rochefort sent orders via that secure cable. Midway's commander was to broadcast a message in the clear, no encryption, announcing that their desalination plant had broken down. The island was running critically short of fresh water. The message went out on May 18th. Then, they waited. Would the Japanese take the bait? For days, nothing. Then on May 19th, a Japanese intelligence message was intercepted. Station Hypo broke it open, and there, in plain text, were the words Rochefort and Layton had been praying for. AF is short of water. The ruse had worked. Tokyo had taken the bait and confirmed it to the entire Japanese fleet. AF was Midway. There was no longer any doubt. Layton took the message directly to Nimitz. The Admiral read it. Read it again, and for the first time since Pearl Harbor, he smiled. "They've told us what we needed to know," Nimitz said quietly. "Now we can prepare our reception." But the confirmation of the target was only the beginning. Rochefort's team still needed to answer 3 critical questions. When would the attack come? What was the size of the Japanese force? And most importantly, from which direction? During the last week of May, Rochefort's team worked around the clock. They reviewed every intercept from May 19th to 20. They broke through the Japanese date encryption system, something Washington's OP-20G had failed to do. And piece by piece, the picture emerged. 4 Japanese carriers, the exact same strike force that had devastated Pearl Harbor, led by Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, approaching from the northwest. Strike date, June 4th. May 27th, 1942, the day that would change everything. At 8 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton walked into Admiral Nimitz's headquarters. With him were Commander Joseph Rochefort and the heads of the Pacific Fleet staff. What happened next would be recounted in military academies for the next 80 years. Layton stood before the map and delivered his assessment. Not a guess, not an estimate, a prediction. "Admiral, the Japanese carrier strike force will approach Midway from the northwest on a bearing of 325 degrees. They will be sighted at approximately 700 hours local time on the morning of June 4th, 1942. Distance, approximately 175 miles northwest of Midway." The room went silent. Some of Nimitz's staff officers were skeptical. They thought it was guesswork, even dangerous guesswork. But Nimitz understood. He had learned to trust the Rochefort-Layton partnership. He knew they wouldn't have come to him unless they were certain. Nimitz looked at Layton and asked a single question. "How confident are you?" Layton didn't hesitate. "Admiral, I'd stake my career on it." Nimitz made his decision. He would commit everything. All 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, would deploy to a position northeast of Midway that they codenamed Point Luck. They would arrive before the Japanese, and they would wait in ambush. There was one problem. Yorktown had been badly damaged at the Battle of Coral Sea just 3 weeks earlier. Navy engineers estimated 3 months of repairs in dry dock. Nimitz gave them 3 days. For 72 hours, 1,400 workers labored day and night. They patched the hull. They repaired the flight deck. They jury-rigged systems that should have been completely rebuilt. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty. But it was enough. On May 28th, just 1 day after Layton's briefing, Admiral Raymond Spruance led Task Force 16 out of Pearl Harbor with Enterprise and Hornet. On May 30th, Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher followed with Yorktown and Task Force 17. June 4th, 1942. Dawn, exactly when Layton had predicted. At 52 hours, 5:52 in the morning, a PBY Catalina patrol plane radioed Pearl Harbor. Enemy carriers sighted, bearing 320 degrees. Distance 180 miles northwest of Midway. Time 0700 hours. When the report reached Pearl Harbor, Nimitz turned to Layton with a slight smile and said, "Well, you were only 5 minutes, 5 degrees, and 5 miles out." What followed was one of the most decisive naval battles in history. American dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown struck the Japanese carrier force at the most vulnerable moment, while their aircraft were being refueled and rearmed on the flight decks. In 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were transformed into blazing wrecks. By the end of the day, a 4th carrier, Hiryu, would join them at the bottom of the Pacific. The victory came at a cost. Yorktown was hit by Japanese dive bombers and torpedoed by a submarine. She would sink on June 7th. 307 American servicemen died at Midway. But Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 2 48 aircraft, and over 3,000 men, including many of their most experienced pilots. The Imperial Japanese Navy would never recover. Within days of the victory, disaster nearly struck from an unexpected direction. On June 7th, the Chicago Tribune published a front-page story revealing that the Navy had known about the Japanese plans in advance. The headline might as well have read, "We can read your codes." If the Japanese had seen the article and believed it, they would have immediately changed their codes. Every advantage gained from JN-25 would evaporate. The Roosevelt administration considered prosecuting the Tribune for espionage, but there was a problem. Doing so would bring even more attention to the story. In the end, no charges were filed. Miraculously, the Japanese either never saw the article or dismissed it as American propaganda. They continued using JN-25 for the remainder of the war, and American codebreakers continued reading their secrets. 1 year later, on April 18, 1943, Station Hypo intercepted a message revealing that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, would be inspecting bases in the Solomon Islands. American P-38 fighters intercepted his aircraft and shot it down. Japan's greatest naval strategist was dead. But there was a dark epilogue. In late 1942, Washington finally had enough of Joseph Rochefort's insubordination. He had bypassed the chain of command. He had made OP-20G look foolish. And so, just months after Midway, Rochefort was removed from Station Hypo and ordered to Washington for temporary consulting. "I'm not coming back," Rochefort told Layton. He was right. He spent the rest of the war in obscurity, denied the recognition he deserved. It wouldn't be until 1986, 14 years after his death, that Joseph Rochefort would finally receive the Distinguished Service Medal for his work at Midway. May 27, 1942, the day Admiral Nimitz knew he could read every Japanese secret. The day Edwin Layton delivered the most accurate battlefield prediction in military history. The day that gave America exactly 8 days to prepare for the most important naval battle of World War II. Intelligence wins wars. Not always. Not every time. But at Midway, it was the difference between victory and catastrophic defeat. It was the difference between a Japanese empire spanning the Pacific and an American counteroffensive that would end in Tokyo Bay 3 years later. The codebreakers of Station Hypo worked in a basement. They wore rumpled uniforms and slippers. They never fired a shot, but they changed the course of history. In the fall of 1942, Admiral Nimitz gave Edwin Layton a signed photograph. The inscription read, "To Commander Edwin T. Layton, as my intelligence officer, you are more valuable to me than any division of cruisers." On the morning of June 4, 1942, when those first sighting reports came in, Nimitz turned to Layton and smiled. "You were only 5 minutes, 5 degrees, and 5 miles out. In the history of warfare, there has never been a more precise prediction." And it all began with a briefing on May 27, 1942, the day Nimitz knew. In memory of the 307 Americans who gave their lives at Midway, and the codebreakers who made their sacrifice meaningful,